September 5th, 1991. Garden Lodge, Kensington, London. Sunlight filtering through the windows of the elegant Victorian home spread softly across rooms filled with Japanese artwork and antiques. In the quietness of Thursday, a small group of people had gathered within the walls of this special home. A birthday was being celebrated. Champagne bottles were placed in ice buckets, keeping their freshness. An elegant birthday cake stood on the dining table, and soft music played in the background. Freddie Mercury was stepping into his 45th year, but the guests knew a truth not yet revealed to the outside world. This would be Freddie's last birthday. His friends would never have the chance to sing him a birthday song again. The last slice of cake, the last raised glasses, the last dance. Everyone in that room felt the weight of this reality. Yet nobody spoke it aloud, because Freddie had made it explicitly clear. This was a celebration, not a farewell ceremony. There was no room for sulking. There would be laughter, not tears. This was a sharing of joy, not pity. Just 2 months later, Freddie would say goodbye to life. But on that September day, surrounded by those who loved him most, he was still here, still himself, still Freddie, determined to live one more moment, to have one more celebration, despite the inevitable end. So how do you celebrate a birthday when you know it's your last? How can you laugh, smile, and act as if everything's fine when everyone in the room knows farewell is approaching fast? How do you give your friend the gift of a normal day when your own heart is broken? Welcome to Story Factory. Here, we're together with narratives that bring to light the truth behind the legends. I'm here to share the special moments and unforgettable stories that show who these icons truly were. Today, we're stepping inside Garden Lodge on September 5th, 1991, into Freddie Mercury's final birthday party, a gathering that was both celebration and farewell, where love and loss existed in the same room, in the same moment. This is the story of how a legend said goodbye without saying the words. By September 1991, Freddie had been living with AIDS for years. The disease had been kept secret from the public. Only his closest circle knew. His appearance had changed dramatically. The robust, commanding figure who'd owned stages in front of hundreds of thousands was now frail, thin, moving carefully through his own home. But Freddie Mercury had never been one to surrender. Even now, even facing death, he refused to let the disease define his final days. He still dressed impeccably every day, still insisted on maintaining routines, still wanted to mark occasions that mattered. And his birthday mattered. Garden Lodge had become his sanctuary, the house he'd spent years perfecting, filling with beauty, artwork, antiques, his beloved koi pond in the garden, rooms designed for comfort and elegance. This was where he felt safe, protected from the tabloid photographers who'd been circling for months, trying to get that photograph, that confirmation of what they already suspected. Inside these walls, Freddie could be himself. Not the rock god, not the performer, just Freddie. With Jim Hutton, his partner, who'd become his primary caretaker, though Freddie hated that word. With Mary Austin, the love of his life who'd remained his closest friend even after their romantic relationship ended years before. With Phoebe Freestone, his personal assistant and friend who managed the household. With Joe Finelli, his chef and friend. With a small circle of people who loved him not for his fame, but for who he was. The decision to have a birthday party wasn't grand. Freddie simply said he wanted to celebrate, wanted his friends around, wanted normalcy, or as close to normal as possible. Jim Hutton later recalled the planning, keeping it small, intimate, manageable, nothing too exhausting, nothing that would make Freddie feel like an invalid, just a party, cake, champagne, friends, simple pleasures. The morning of September 5th began quietly. Freddie woke in the bedroom he shared with Jim, overlooking the garden. Getting dressed took longer now than it used to. His clothes hung looser, but he still chose carefully. An elegant shirt, comfortable trousers, still styled his hair. Still looked at himself in the mirror and saw not a dying man, but Freddie Mercury having a birthday. His cats, Delilah, Romeo, Lily, Miko, Goliath, sensed the activity in the house. Freddie loved his cats with an intensity that surprised people who knew him only as the flamboyant rock star. They were his constant companions in these final months. Uncomplicated affection, unconditional love. They didn't care about fame or illness. They just wanted to be near him. The guests began arriving in the afternoon. Mary Austin came early, as she always did. She'd been part of Freddie's life since 1969, 22 years of friendship, love, history. She knew him better than almost anyone. She'd watched him transform from Farrokh Bulsara into Freddie Mercury, watched him conquer the world, watched him fight this final battle. And now, she was here for his last birthday, carrying a gift and a smile and a breaking heart. Brian May and Roger Taylor came, his bandmates, his brothers in music. They'd known each other since 1970, 21 years of touring, recording, fighting, creating, laughing. They'd been through everything together, and now this. Brian later said it was one of the hardest things he'd ever done, pretending everything was fine, keeping the conversation light, when all he wanted was to scream at the unfairness of it. The party was held in the dining room and the adjoining sitting room. Not a large gathering, maybe 10 or 12 people. Intimate, comfortable, the way Freddie wanted it. Champagne was poured. Freddie managed a glass, though drinking had become difficult. Food was prepared by Joe. Beautiful dishes that Freddie could barely eat, but the effort mattered. The care mattered. Someone put music on. Of course there was music. Freddie's whole life had been music. Classical pieces. He'd always loved opera, Mozart, the great composers. Not Queen records. This wasn't about his career. This was about beauty, about enjoying sound and melody for their own sake. The birthday cake was brought out. Chocolate, Freddie's favorite. Candles lit. Not 45. That would have been too much. Too pointed. Just a few candles symbolizing the day. Everyone gathered around and sang Happy Birthday. Freddie smiled. That smile that had charmed millions. A little weaker now. A little sadder, but still unmistakably his. He made a wish. Blew out the candles. Nobody asked what he wished for. What do you wish for when you know time has run out? Maybe peace. Maybe more days like this one. Maybe that the people you love will be okay when you're gone. Gifts were exchanged. Small things. Personal things. Nothing grand. Freddie had everything money could buy. What mattered now were gestures, memories, tokens of affection. Mary gave him something she'd chosen carefully, knowing it would be the last birthday gift she'd ever give him. Jim gave him something made with love. His friends brought things meant to make him smile. Between the champagne and the cake and the gifts, there was conversation. Careful conversation. Nobody talked about the future because there wasn't much future left to discuss. Nobody talked about the past in a way that felt like summing up a life. They talked about small things. Funny memories, shared jokes. The kind of talk that fills space and keeps the darkness at bay. Freddie held court from his chair. He was too weak to stand for long, but his personality still filled the room. He made jokes. He told stories. He laughed at his friends' attempts to cheer him up. He was, for those few hours, not a dying man, but the Freddie they'd always known. Witty, sharp, warm, present. There are photographs from that day. Not many. This was private, sacred. But a few images were captured. In them, you can see Freddie's face, thinner, yes, but smiling. You can see his friends around him, love visible in every gesture. You can see the champagne glasses, the cake, the normalcy they were all working so hard to maintain. But if you look closely at those photographs, you can see something else too. The careful way everyone's positioned around Freddie, protective without being obvious. The way Mary's looking at him, memorizing every detail. The way Jim's staying close but not hovering. The way Brian and Roger are present but subdued, letting Freddie lead the tone of the day. At some point during the afternoon, Freddie asked for music to dance to. Even now, even this week, he wanted to move to music. Jim helped him up. They danced together, slowly, carefully, in the sitting room. Not the athletic, commanding movements Freddie had been known for on stage, just a gentle swaying, holding each other. The others watched, trying not to cry. It was a moment of pure intimacy, a private Freddie that the world never got to see. Not the showman, not the legend. Just a man dancing with the person he loved, in his own home, on his final birthday. The party didn't last long, a few hours at most. Freddie tired easily, but he stayed as long as he could, soaking up the presence of his friends, the warmth of people who genuinely cared for him. When exhaustion finally overtook him, he said his goodbyes, thanked everyone for coming, and retreated to his bedroom with Jim's help. The guests left carrying the weight of what they'd just experienced. Not just a birthday party, but a farewell, a goodbye that couldn't be spoken, but was understood by everyone present. They left Garden Lodge and stepped back into a world that didn't yet know Freddie Mercury was dying. That wouldn't know for another 2 months, when he'd release that statement on November 23rd, confirming what the tabloids had been speculating about for years. But the people who were at that birthday party, they knew. They'd been living with the knowledge for months, some for years, watching their friend fade, trying to give him dignity, normalcy, love in his final days. Mary Austin later said that the birthday party was both beautiful and devastating. Beautiful because Freddie was still himself, still finding joy in small things, still surrounded by love. Devastating because everyone knew. The unspoken truth hung in the air despite all the champagne and laughter. This was goodbye. Jim Hutton, in his memoir, described September 5, 1991, with tender detail. He wrote about how determined Freddie was to celebrate, how he refused to treat the day as sad or morbid, how he wanted his friends to remember him celebrating life, not mourning its end. Jim wrote about dancing with Freddie that afternoon, holding him gently, feeling how fragile he'd become, and loving him even more fiercely for his courage. The weeks after the birthday party moved quickly. September turned to October, October to November. Freddie's condition worsened. He spent more time in bed, less time able to move around the house. His friends visited when they could, but the visits became shorter, harder. Watching someone you love disappear a little more each day is a particular kind of torture. On November 23rd, Freddie released his statement. Following the enormous conjecture in the press over the last 2 weeks, I wish to confirm that I have been tested HIV positive and have AIDS. I felt it correct to keep this information private to date to protect the privacy of those around me. However, the time has now come to tell those who have been speculating on this subject the truth. My privacy has always been very special to me, and I am famous for my lack of interviews. Please understand this policy will continue. Less than 24 hours later, on November 24, 1991, at 7 p.m., Freddie Mercury died at Garden Lodge, with Jim Hutton by his side. The world mourned a legend. Millions of people who'd never met him grieved for the voice that had been silenced, the performer they'd never see again. Tributes poured in from across the globe. The music industry lost an icon. Rock and roll lost one of its greatest frontmen. But the people who'd been at that birthday party 2 months earlier, they mourned something more personal. They mourned Freddie, the friend who'd made them laugh, the man who'd insisted on celebrating his final birthday with champagne and cake instead of tears. The person who, even facing death, had thought about making others comfortable, had worked to create one more joyful memory instead of a sad ending. In the years since, those who were present at that September 5th gathering have spoken carefully about it. It's still tender, still sacred. Brian May has mentioned it in interviews, his voice always changing when he talks about that day. Mary Austin has remained largely private about her final times with Freddie, protecting those memories as fiercely as she protected him in life. But the story has emerged in pieces. The birthday party that was really a goodbye. The celebration that everyone knew was the last one. The afternoon when a group of friends gathered around someone they loved and gave him the gift of normalcy, of joy, of not having to face his mortality alone or with pity. There's something profound about how Freddie chose to spend that day. He could have been angry, bitter, withdrawn. He could have refused to celebrate, seeing no point in marking another year when he knew there wouldn't be many days left, let alone another birthday. But that wasn't who he was. Even dying, Freddie Mercury chose life, chose celebration, chose to be surrounded by love rather than isolation. It was an act of courage as powerful as any performance he'd ever given. Standing on stage in front of hundreds of thousands took bravery, yes. But sitting in your own home, surrounded by friends who are trying not to cry, insisting on cake and champagne and music when your body is failing, that takes a different kind of courage. The kind that doesn't get applause or headlines. The quiet, private courage of facing the end with dignity and grace. For the people who loved Freddie, that birthday party became a gift. Yes, it was heartbreaking. Yes, it was devastating. But it was also exactly what he wanted to give them. A memory of him living, not just dying, smiling, not suffering, celebrating, not surrendering. Mary Austin kept parts of the birthday cake. She couldn't bear to throw it away. It sat in her freezer for months after his death, a small piece of that last celebration preserved. Eventually, she let it go, but the impulse to hold on to every fragment of that day speaks to how precious it was, how much it mattered. The contrast between that private gathering and Freddie's public life could not have been sharper. The world knew Freddie Mercury the superstar, the voice, the showmanship, the legend, but the people at Garden Lodge on September 5th, 1991, knew Freddie. The man who loved his cats, who collected art, who danced slowly with his partner in the afternoon light, who insisted on having a birthday party even when every breath was becoming difficult. Both versions were real. Both were Freddie, the public and the private, the performer and the person, the legend and the man. But it's the private Freddie, the one his friends knew, the one who celebrated that final birthday with such determination, who reveals the true measure of who he was. Today, when people talk about Freddie Mercury, they often talk about Live Aid, about Wembley, Nebworth, the iconic performances. Those are important. Those are part of his legacy. But so is September 5th, 1991. The birthday party nobody outside his circle knew about until years later. The quiet afternoon when a dying man chose joy over despair, celebration over mourning. The people who were there carry it with them. It informs how they talk about Freddie, how they remember him, not just as the greatest rock frontman who ever lived, but as someone who faced death the way he'd faced life, on his own terms, with style, with courage, refusing to let fear or illness rob him of one last celebration. Maybe you've experienced something similar. Maybe you've been to a gathering where everyone knew it was the last time, but nobody said those words. Where the room held both laughter and sorrow, joy and grief, celebration and farewell all at once. It's a uniquely human experience, this ability to hold contradictions, to smile while your heart is breaking, to celebrate life even as death approaches. Freddie gave his friends that experience, and in doing so, he gave them a gift. Not just the memory of that day, but a lesson in how to face the unfaceable. How to insist on joy when everything is falling apart. How to love and be loved right up until the very end. September 5th, 1991, wasn't Freddie Mercury's last day. He'd live another 2.5 months. But in many ways, It was his final celebration, his last gathering of the tribe, his last time being the center of attention for something happy rather than tragic, his last birthday cake, last champagne toast, last dance. And he made sure it was beautiful, made sure his friends would remember laughter instead of just tears, made sure that when they thought of his final months, they'd have this moment, this perfect, bittersweet, achingly human moment of a birthday party that was so much more than a birthday party. This story is based on documented accounts, memoirs from Jim Hutton and Peter Freestone, and interviews with those close to Freddie Mercury. While specific dialogue and some details have been dramatized to honor the emotional truth of the day, the core facts remain. September 5th, 1991, was Freddie Mercury's 45th and final birthday, celebrated privately at Garden Lodge with his closest friends who knew they were saying goodbye. If this story touched you, if it reminded you that legends are human too, that private courage matters as much as public triumph, consider subscribing to Story Factory. We're here to share the moments you never saw, the stories behind the icon, the truth that makes the legend more real, not less. Freddie Mercury died on November 24, 1991. But on September 5th, 2 months before the end, he celebrated one more birthday. He danced, he smiled, he was surrounded by love. And in doing so, he showed everyone in that room how to say goodbye without saying the words, how to celebrate life even when time is running out, how to be brave in the quietest, most profound way possible. That's the real legacy. Not just the music, though the music will last forever, but the way he lived and the way he died. With dignity, with love, with one last party, one last dance, one last moment of joy before the final curtain.